Congratulations, Grace Point, on 120 years.
120 years celebrating God's faithfulness. I love that tagline because that sums it all up.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Who are you?
My name is Ross Manders.
And you are what?
The pastor of Restoration Church.
And I am Emily Manders, and I would say I'm also Emily Ritter Manders, for those of you who may be familiar with my family. My story with Grace Point really begins back at First Baptist Church of Newtown in December 1984, when my dad, Dave Ritter, was called to be the senior pastor. That went on for 2 decades plus a few more years of leading First Baptist, which eventually moved to the land that you currently are on and is now called Grace Point. But my story, I feel like, is really summed up by Ephesians 2:10, which says, "For we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus, so we can do the good things He planned for us long ago." And I can just see that how throughout my life of growing up as an adopted daughter, I feel like by so many of you, or an adopted niece or cousin or granddaughter even, how being poured into spiritually and raised up and mentored by so many of you has led to where I'm at in my current life now. And I'm just so thankful to have the spiritual roots that I do from First Baptist, now Grace Point. And so many of you are part of that story. So your story intersects as well.
Yeah, I feel like
really Grace Point more than First Baptist.
Yeah, I have a lot of spiritual roots with Grace Point as well. Even though I'm from Minnesota, I came out in 2003 because you needed a worship leader, and Daryl went up to Spofford, Emily went up to Spofford, and you left the gap. And so I filled that gap for you for 2 summers actually. I was baptized the summer of 2003 at Grace Point by Dave. It was a really cool experience. And then
eventually we were
married
at First Baptist Church of Newtown.
Yeah, second to last wedding at that church.
With Bill and Jody Wright following us that same day, a couple hours later.
Yeah, so we have a lot of roots there, of course. Yeah. But part of our story is that in 2003, the elders of...
Well, I mean, we went on to seminary. You went on to seminary. I went on to leading worship in churches in Minnesota. And eventually, you felt called to church planting.
Yeah. We were part of a church plant. I felt a call to church planting, and so we started making arrangements to maybe move in that direction. We called Chris McCluskey, who was the pastor of Grace Point at the time, and it just so happened that Grace Point was in a similar conversation.
Because of the 2003 vision, which is what you're starting to say before.
Yep.
So there was a vision that was cast in 2003 with my dad and the staff, the current staff and elders of that time. And that vision statement had a line that said, people need to be involved in something much bigger than themselves. And it went on to describe...
mobilizing their body to reach their region and the world. Yeah. But really, the spirit, and your dad would say this, the spirit of that vision was that...
There was a little line about resourcing church planting in the region. Yeah. But in Dad's heart, he felt like that meant...
a church plant from Grace Point within the next 10 years.
Right.
And so we started a conversation in 2009 with Grace Point about what church planting with them would look like. We didn't feel called to church plant in Minnesota, where we were living at the time. We wanted to come to a region of the world who we felt we could be on mission with. Yeah. And Chris said, come on out to the Church Planters Assessment Center, which we're hosting in 2010.
They did that in partnership with Converge, who has an amazing church planting assessment center. Gave us recommendations of things that we needed to go back home to Minnesota to work through for about the next 12 to 18 months. Right? Yeah,
and over those next 2 years, we candidated with Grace Point. We came out, I preached, I cast visions.
That was November 2012. We moved out here for you to begin that campus pastor, I think was the exact title position.
And to start what was then a nameless church somewhere within the region. Yeah.
Right. There was a map that Brian Weber had put together. He was a big part of our journey too, right? That pinpointed where every Grace Point family lived to see how far people were having to drive to church, to kind of see where maybe strategic locations would be to plant a church. Yeah. So they had a few options, but we really had no idea where we were going to land.
Yeah. We had no idea who was going to come with us. But as the dust settled, 84 people on paper decided that they were going to come with us. Because as part of this whole church planning thing that Grace Point was doing, they had an impact campaign.
Right.
$250,000 was raised so generously by Grace Point. And
for this church plant.
And 84 people were committed to the cause. And so we didn't know where we were going to be, though. Like, that's a big thing. You need a location for a church plant in.
Well, and even recruiting your people can be hard because they want to know, well, is it in my neighborhood or do I have family there? Like, maybe I'll come if you're going to be somewhere where, like, I have family that I would like them to get to know Jesus because of you guys, you know? Yep. So, yep.
And so we looked at warehouses and schools and all sorts of things, and none of them felt right. But one day after a vision message that I gave at Grace Point, Jamie Cooner came, approached me and said, hey, my dad's church down in Levittown, they're aging, they don't want to continue the ministry, they're tired, and so they're looking for a new church plant to come and maybe take over their space. Would you be interested in coming and checking out this building? And we're like, hey, we'll take any option right now. Nothing's off the table. And so Brian, Chris, Dave Lewis, I think, a couple of the people maybe.
Steve, I think he was taking pictures.
Came down into the Pinewood section of Levittown to what was then Evangelical Presbyterian Church. And I kid you not, I remember this night vividly. It was raining, it was dark, and we approached this building and it felt like a haunted church. It did. Like, it was dimly lit.
You have pictures. You're going to show pictures of this while you're talking.
Yes, narrow corridors.
Well, there's stuff everywhere.
Cobwebs.
Every room was like stuffed with church paraphernalia from the past
70 years. Yeah.
I don't know if they're quite that old.
60 maybe. Yeah. Anyway, so it took I think a God-sized intervention to help us see the vision through the current condition of the building.
But it also was an obvious, because I'm thinking of another thing happening right now in our life. It was an obvious time when God was providing, right? And it became clearer as we agreed to continue to walk through an open door, because we'd had all closed doors, right? Yeah. And explore it, that this is where God was leading. Yeah. And just even the deal that was made with the Presbyterian Church Planting Association, like, our mortgage isn't even really a mortgage. It's a donation to their church planting fund every month. Yeah. And literally EPC handed us the key and said, it's all yours.
It's all yours.
Which ended up with me having my favorite piano in the world, by the way. So we can talk about all the other stuff, but I love that piano.
Another story for another time.
Another story, yep. But that led to a free sale because we basically cleaned out the whole building and put it on our lawn and let people come and just take whatever they felt they could use. Yeah. We donated the pews. Several tens and hundreds of you came and helped to tear things out, right?
Yeah, so it wasn't just the 84 and the launch team. It was a greater effort by Grace Point and the people to come and to help us renovate this space. Yeah. To restore the space to what would be usable then for reaching this community for Christ. Mm-hmm. And so we're indebted.
You were all part of that vision, that restoration project.
Yes, very much indebted to people well beyond the 84 people who signed up to come along with us.
And a lot of you came and helped us with our backyard barbecue. That was one of our things we did. And maybe even that first trunk or treat. I think we had a lot of Grace Point people come and do trunks with us.
Yeah, started reaching our community in unique ways.
Because we needed manpower and woman power, and you guys all showed up in big ways. Yeah. Yeah.
And so it was a restorative process. It was a restorative project from day one. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just about the building, right? The building's important, but the church isn't the building.
Yeah, but I think the life that our community saw coming back into the building as we restored it from the inside out, I think drew people to wonder, what's going on there?
Right. You know? So there's like some symbolism about the restorative process, of course, that is still impacting our community today. Yeah. We came with 84 people from Newtown and Langhorne and various other places, and a few from Levittown. But when you look at our database now, it's Pinewood and Lakeside and Stony Brook and Levittown and Bristol and Morrisville and Tullytown.
We have a picture of the very launch team first prayer circle out front. And then this summer we have a picture of a prayer circle we did out front in the same location. And what gives me the goosebumps and makes me cry is that now that circle looks like our neighborhood. Yeah. And looks like lives that we know personally how Jesus has transformed them and their families by being a part of this place and what God is doing here. Yeah. So it's a beautiful journey we've been have a front row seat in.
It is.
Helping to lead forward.
And it's been a restorative journey, and it began because God put upon a vision people up in Newtown. And
they were faithful to that vision.
Yeah. So if there's any encouragement that you should take away from this, it's that where God has guided you, God has provided. And I hope and I pray.
And our fruit here is only just beginning.
Absolutely.
We're only in the first few years of being a church.
Yeah, and our story is part of your story. Mm-hmm. And so be encouraged
We are part of your legacy.
Yeah,
right?
be encouraged that God is doing good work through Grace Point. You can look to the past and look at his faithfulness in the past, last 120 years, and believe that because he's been faithful, because he's provided, that he's going to continue to guide you, and he's going to continue to provide, because he is a faithful God. So, thank you, Grace Point, for all that you've done for us, and we can't wait for what the future holds.